everyone. So today I actually wanted to take some time to deep dive into this new study that just came out not too long ago with regards to recurrence risk reduction and diet impact. So does what we eat actually matter to help us in terms of that secondary prevention aspect of things? After you've already been diagnosed with cancer once, does it have an impact of being diagnosed again? So this is a question that a lot of us cancer survivors have in terms of, is there anything we can do to help to reduce our risk in the future? And certainly brings up a lot of anxiety for a lot of us cancer survivors. So when research like this comes out, I love it because of how empowering this can feel to us and how it can help us to actually feel more motivated to take action for things that could potentially help in terms of even things like this. So let's deep dive into the study right now. And first of all, what we want to discuss is that this study had over 1,500 women actually enrolled into it. So they were all part of the study. They were all breast cancer survivors with a high risk of recurrence already. So their risks were higher than than other women as well. What they did was they basically split the women up into two groups. One group was going to be the intervention group. The intervention group basically means that they're going to be given some guidelines, and the guidelines were based on a Mediterranean style diet. They also were given more support and were also given or told to exercise 30 minutes a day, every day. Whereas the control group that actually wasn't part of the intervention process, they didn't have a guideline, they were given general sort of cancer prevention recommendations, didn't have all of those things. Now, what happened over the next few years is they were followed up. The women were asked a few questions that they had to submit in to sort of see how they were following the diet and those types of things as well. So what happened was the dietary guidelines that they gave them included a few items and also really discouraged a few other items. And let me know in the comments if any of these items sort of surprise you, because some of them actually might, in terms of why they might encourage it or discourage it. So the recommended foods actually included things like whole grains, legumes, soy products. Again, remember this is a breast cancer survivor study. They included soy products, vegetables, fruit, nuts, olive oil, and fish. And they discourage foods like refined foods, so things like white bread or baked goods, for example, potatoes, sugar, desserts, red meat, processed meat, dairy products, and alcoholic drinks. So again, if you see anything or hear anything within both of those guidelines or foods that they included in the encouraged or discouraged sort of line, let me know if there's anything that you're kind of surprised about, because I think for some people, some of these items might be surprising. Now, what they did with the guidelines is they gave them the guidelines, they gave them some support around the guidelines and how to eat that way, and then they followed them over more than 5 years. So after over 5 years time, what they found was that the number of women with a recurrence were actually the same within the intervention group that had those dietary guidelines and also the control group. For both groups, they had about 12% of the women who actually had a recurrence. Now, we can't just stop there, because that's not it. If you just looked at that, you would say, okay, well, maybe does it matter really then if people are eating a Mediterranean style diet or not? The other thing that we have to note too is just because someone was in the intervention group versus the control group doesn't necessarily mean that they were following the diet exactly, right? So there was no control in how closely these women were following them. That was just an individual thing, and they were just reporting whether or not they were following it. What they saw when they looked deeper into that intervention group and analyzed the data there more was that the women in the intervention group who followed this type of diet the most, so this Mediterranean style diet the most, had actually a 41% lower recurrence risk than those who followed it the least, meaning that diet could actually definitely impact our recurrence risk, first of all, but it also didn't really depend on knowledge gathering, which a lot of us cancer survivors tend to do. I was the same way. I wanted to learn as much as I could. I wanted to know which types of foods were good for me, which types of foods might not be good for me. But it was really about the actions that people were taking. How closely could we follow what we actually knew to be good, potentially? And what we do know through the data is that these Mediterranean style diets are actually really beneficial for a lot of different types of cancers, in terms of that prevention aspect of things. So what they also found was that this seemed to be even more impactful for women who had estrogen positive breast cancers, as well as estrogen positive breast cancers and were on tamoxifen. So diet essentially, as a conclusion, could impact that risk of recurrence, and it really depended on how consistent women were on these types of diets as well. What I have to say about this study is a few things. First of all, we do know that diet is so critical and important for many different types of things, including reducing our recurrence risk based on this study. The other reason why I normally focus on diet with my patients and my clients too is because it's really important for our recovery post-treatments as well. So after your finished treatments, your recovery plan should be all about trying to, improve and boost your immune system, trying to improve your sleep and your energy and all those things that you're kind of going through during treatments that you couldn't necessarily all tackle during that time. This is the phase where we can get to do that, and diet can play a huge factor here. The other thing is around optimizing our health. So there's many different hormone imbalances that can happen during treatment as well. We know that cancer patients or survivors are at higher risk than the general population for things like hypothyroidism or diabetes, and having impacts on metabolism and other things as well, potentially being pushed into menopause earlier than they normally would be. So all of those things, food can actually, or a diet can create an impact for that as well. And for me, it was really based on how I wanted to feel on a daily basis. When we go away with my family, for example, I know exactly what foods I don't normally do well with. And if I have those foods, I know how my body's going to respond. And part of that aspect of things around diet too is understanding and being able to listen to the cues that our bodies give us. So if you do have a sensitivity to a food, and that could be many different types of foods. For example, for myself, it tends to be dairy and gluten that I'm quite sensitive to. And so I'm mindful of that. But understanding those things help you to understand also how your body might respond to it and how much you can have of that specific type of food too. Not necessarily always related to cancer risk, but also just because we want to feel the best that we can on a regular basis. And I know for many of us out there, we're also parents, we might be grandparents, we might also have partners and other loved ones and family members that we want to be able to spend more time with and be there 100%. And oftentimes the way that we feel doesn't always align with what we want to be doing. Diet is going to be a huge part of that. So not only is it important, as this study actually outlined, and if you have a different type of cancer and it's not breast cancer related, this study is like many other studies out there where it does still lead and push us to the same conclusion, which is what we do, what we eat actually matters for our health, whether we're talking about prevention before we're even diagnosed with cancer, or prevention after we've had a cancer diagnosis before, or maybe it's not even related to cancer at all. Diet has a huge impact on our health and our body, and so what we eat is going to matter at any stage. And this study just helped to highlight that a little bit more too for us, but also highlighted some important facts, right? These processed foods, alcohol, things that could potentially feed chronic inflammatory processes are all sort of to be something that we want to eat less of. The ones that we want to actually make up most of our diet are those plant-based things. Soy products, if you saw that on the list, is one thing that I know a lot of people are sort of scared about, especially if you've had a breast cancer or estrogen positive driven type cancer, because a lot of practitioners still might say, okay, well, you shouldn't have any soy, it's got phytoestrogens. What we've seen in data, and also obviously with this particular study, is that eating soy products is actually not necessarily a bad thing. It's ensuring that it's in the right format, so it's whole soy foods, whether it's tofu or edamame or soy milk, for example. I also always recommend my patients to have organic soy products because it's so genetically modified normally, and also it helps to decrease the amount of pesticides they use on it as well. Those are the types of foods that are actually helpful for us, whereas things like soy isolates or things that are more processed forms of soy have actually been shown in data to potentially fuel more cancerous type processes. So the types of foods that we have are actually really important. The format that we have and the amounts that we have are also really important. So there's many critical things to really think about. But if we just simplify the process, if we just simplify all of the data that we have out there, we do know that this Mediterranean style diet can be really helpful. It can also be helpful to get the support that you need around that, because oftentimes what I also see my patients sort of wondering about is, I don't really know how to do this by myself. So if you need someone to help you to actually action things out, because what we saw from this data was it's really about how closely we can actually have these things in a habit form every day. It's not just about changing a little bit of something for a little period of time. It's about that consistency that's really going to matter. They really just looked at the data around diet to really come up with this conclusion, where we see this 41% lower recurrence risk with women who actually followed the diet the closest. So if you'd like, you can also subscribe to the channel to get notices when new videos are posted up. But I would love to know in the comments if there's anything about this research data that surprises you. And we can discuss that a little bit further too if need be. See you in the next one.